Welcome to On Air with Kash. Our guest today is an actress who's appeared in hit television series and films. Please welcome Abigail Kochunas.
Thank you for having me.
Abigail, it is so good to see you again. Abigail and I actually go back a bit. I think it was we were in this pilot together. I remember everyone on set kept calling us Russell Brand and Katy Perry. You were kind of a diva, and I was this rock poser guy. It was a fun, good cast. And we met each other, and I went and saw some of your performances. A couple of your films have been in the festival circuit. You've actually just started your own company, and you've really been about mental health and healing right now. And I think that really coming out of this pandemic, artists such as ourselves, we've all had experiences that have shaped us and made us unique in how we are. And I know that recently you've been on Podcast One, you've been featured in The Hollywood Reporter for addressing certain things that you personally experienced in the industry.
Yeah, that is correct. In the acting class world.
I've been in different acting classes at different times. I grew up in the industry, and when someone wants to blow you off, they'll be like, oh, we'll get into a class, meet a producer, you're trying to get involved in a project. And I'm all for training. The downside of certain classes is like, and I've been in some great ones, not to put to, I think that any artist, any skill that
I'm
you
in a great one now. So
exactly. Yeah. It all requires training, but then there are times when I feel like a lot of people in the industry do have an agenda. And what unfortunately does happen is you can get in with someone who maybe has a one-liner in a movie that you remember, and you spend the class listening to boasting about big names that they've once upon a time to work with. From my personal experiences, being in certain classes, and it does take on this therapy kind of experience when you're with your peers, and then you have the instructor, and you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And I feel like certain people have had their best interests for their students and for their artists, but then there is that thing where they're not getting the respect. They had one line in a classic movie from 20 years ago or were on a show a while back, and I sympathize with that to a degree, but then it's taking whatever's not happening in your career, living in the past, and then using who you once upon a time worked with, kind of a platform to be like, well, I've worked with so-and-so, I was directed by this, and you need to be able to put up with this to attain this.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yep. I've heard that before many times.
Many times. You're so talented and you're very passionate about what you do. And as an artist, I understand we're sensitive. We are emotional. You were always dedicated to your craft, studying, booking. I know that you had been involved in a class. And when I saw this interview where you talked about leaving, you really addressed some experiences. I looked at it where even starting the show was a sort of a therapy for me, because I had been dealing with some scars from the past. I had been getting into podcasting, and with the pandemic happening, we were all stuck at home, and this was a way for us to connect with our peers and other artists. So then when I saw you, your calmness, your coolness, you were very assertive. It was just something where I understood exactly what you had been through, as far as just dedicating all your time and investing in this class, and thinking that it was the best thing for you. And then you really had the strength to walk away and say, this isn't working for me anymore, and I'd be better somewhere else. I really commend you for getting to that point in your life and realizing this isn't good for me anymore.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a big wake-up call, and it's a scary wake-up call, because it's taking everything you've known and everything you've believed about your entire life and what you're doing and your purpose, and going whoop, upside down.
Wow.
And I was at the time when I started recognizing and seeing just sort of, it's a perspective shift, I would say. And I started seeing how things weren't okay, and how I had been normalizing and justifying abuse on every level: emotional, physical, financial. And when I started to see what it actually was, I was like, oh my God, I have to get out of here. I have to get out of here. And I was like panicked, and I had all this rage coming up, and then I would be sobbing, and I was like, wow, I have to get out of here. And thankfully, because it was the pandemic, I was able to exit more easily without having to come face to face with my teacher. And I started to see a lot of things that were not okay. I started to see the ways in which I was being manipulated and used, the way others were being manipulated and used, the way there was gaslighting, the way that our personal information or our personal histories and traumas were being weaponized against us without our permission, in public, in front of the entire class. Or other people's private information was being gossiped about to me because I was in the inner circle, I was one of her officers. I drove her to class. I did a lot of errands for her. So it was a different dynamic than a lot of the people that are actually still in class.
And I totally noticed like to have that realization, and life is so much those gray areas, and
Yeah.
you don't always you don't recognize what you're in if it seems so normal to you. And then
Right.
slowly things start unraveling or you pick up on stuff. For me personally, when you grow up in a
Hmm.
dysfunctional situation, you think that that's normal. And then when you go and, talk to someone else and you're like, Cash, that isn't normal. This isn't what people go through. You're not supposed to go through this at a point in your life. And so it's having strength to be able to reevaluate, because I think the hard thing too is, I mean, and I've had moments in my life where I've been in denial, where with me it was like growing up in a certain situation and I didn't understand why things were happening. I mean, because you're, of course, when you're young, the big thing with theater too is it's respecting authority, respecting your elders, people who've been around, and then of course you believe your teachers and your relatives want the best for you. And then as you get older, you realize that all people hold bitterness. And
Hmm.
sometimes people who, if they have a few credits to their name and they're not at where they want to be in their career, they look at, okay, who looks up to me and how can I get them to follow me? And I mean that
Right.
in a way of like, 'cause this came up the other day when I was being interviewed on a show. They were talking about knowing people in the industry. We all make connections. We all have friends in the industry who are doing well. At some point, you have to decide, where I had to make a decision. You can be around certain people who are doing great, but people don't want to give up their power. And I think for a long time, I assumed that certain people who I was connected to had my best interest, because I've always been the kind of guy like, yeah, let's all do well together. But then you realize if someone's here and you're here, they don't want you getting up here. And then it was when it took me a long time into I saw it a lot when I was a kid. I didn't understand why people were sucking up to them all the time, or if there was a bad situation, why everyone was kind of going along. And then you understand, oh, okay, there's a financial stake. People are drawn to celebrity. And so I watch a lot of people excuse bad behavior and be like, oh, well, if they did it, it's okay. And for a long time, that's the way it was. And I keep going back to like even a show like Entourage, which was the biggest show in the 2000s. And that was when I
Hmm.
started at WME. And it wasn't as open as like the abuse in the office, and it was used as humor on the show. And at the time, this is still reality television's kind of new, everything's all scripted, so you're like, oh, this is like a ha-ha inside to how things are. But when you're in those situations, they don't happen like how they happen on a show. But then we back up all these years later and it's very cringeworthy to watch certain things on television when you're like, wow, they were kind of openly saying we knew these things all along and we're
Hmm.
laughing at it. And there were so many people that just even getting in the industry at that point, everyone, of course, was this whole bro fantasy. You're friends with the movie star, you're living the life. But then
Yeah.
everyone starting in the industry, they idolized Ari Gold. So as much as people now want to post me too, oh no, it's an ethical industry and we just care about making everyone's dreams come true. I'm like, what? I mean, who's giving you this script to read? I mean, is this Damage Control or what? And Kevin Spacey did a movie back in the 90s, Swimming with Sharks. I remember seeing that when I was a kid, and there's this open, like, hey, that's what the industry's like. You suck it up, you do what the boss tells you to do, you tolerate that abuse, and then you go on to have power, and then you can be that asshole someday. And to me, it's like, why would anyone want to aspire to become that?
Yeah. You brought up a lot, which is really good and interesting. And I think that bitterness thing that you mentioned,
Mhm.
I think it's definitely not in every artist, or I think, everyone at one point or another in their life, of course, does experience that bitterness or that envy or that jealousy or that wish of what they didn't accomplish in their life. And I think someone who's self-aware, or working towards self-awareness and being healthy emotionally and mentally and spiritually will start to realize this isn't helping me, because anger and bitterness and jealousy and wanting revenge, that okay, you might hurt someone else to get back at them, but it's still ultimately hurting you. I mean, that sounds like so cliche and broken record, but for me, actually physically holding on to anger in my body is painful. I think it is so obvious in Hollywood because it's Hollywood and it's a fishbowl on display for everyone. And it is, I don't even watch reality TV. I can't watch it. I'll see clips like on Instagram, but you see like these fist fights that happen on these reality shows between people. And you're like, but that's not okay. But you have an audience at home wanting that, getting off on that, wanting to see more of that. And so I think it's getting normalized and it's getting celebrated, and that's really dangerous. And in terms of my situation, what you had mentioned about, people wanting to, I think it's in every industry. I'm not an expert, but I would categorize what I experienced as narcissistic abuse, because when I go down the laundry list of what narcissistic abuse is, and what narcissists are, and there's different types of narcissism. There's overt, covert, malignant. You start to go, oh, something here isn't right. And I actually read a book called Out of the Fog, an audiobook. And I had watched The Vow, and those two things are kind of what prompted me to go, I think I'm in a high control group or a cult or something, and I'm experiencing narcissistic abuse, and I've got to go. And it's that constant need for validation and approval. And narcissists are highly emotionally intelligent in terms of being able to see all of your weaknesses and just kind of figure out what makes a person tick. And then they can figure out through love bombing and data mining, which is like showering you with affection and making you feel special and getting you to open up to them so that you share all of your fears, your insecurities. And it's, you know, it's a feigned empathy. And that is all in order to gain your trust so that they can then have power over you. So it is sort of like an indoctrination process that I don't just see in the scope of that class. I now see it in a lot of places, in a lot of industries. And I think it's heavily in Hollywood because of the nature of fame and celebrity, and that our culture puts so much on fame and celebrity. Actors weren't always put in this position of fame and gifted with all of these things. And now there's so much with reality TV that there's actors and then there's celebrities. Mm-hmm. So you're like, okay, well, what's going on? Like, what are you doing? What are you contributing to the world? Or are you just, is this just like a vicious cycle of your ego being fed or your ego needing to be fed? And you can see it in politics and you can see it in music. And I'm not naming any names, but everyone knows who I'm talking about. You can see it globally. I think that unresolved bitterness or that unresolved jealousy keeps it so that those people that are up here, of course, are always going to keep these people down here because they need to have their egos fed. And I've definitely, since leaving, my whole universe of friendships has exploded. And I've met so many new people and built so many new relationships. And I'm like, wow, there's actually people who are good in this industry, who give a shit about humanity and other people, and they're kind and they're successful and they're humble. They're humble. Yeah. They're real people. So that gives me hope because I'm like, okay, this is not everyone, but it's definitely an epidemic, for lack of a better word.
You hit the nail right on the head with that one. And for me, for so much of my life, like, as I said, it's like, you're growing up, I was around a lot of people who really, like, they inherited fame. If I was just going through something regular, it's like, well, oh, that's so middle class. And in that lingo, it's not so much just a finance, because even most of the people who say it, they're financially at that level, if not have a lot less, but they think, oh, I'm an artist, so yeah, I don't subscribe to it. And I remember even just at a certain point, you get told something enough, you start believing it, and then if you're in an environment, especially at a young age, you start to become that. And I felt
especially at a young age.
Oh yeah. Being a kid and you realize friendships get manipulated when certain people are around. It happened with like at least 3 friendships. And so people say, oh, that seemed like a fun experience. You got to do this, you got to go on that trip. And I just remembered it really only took me until recently to realize I was always just in a room watching TV or like watching movies, because I just didn't know how to talk to the people around. I felt like everyone was very fake. Like at a young age, I'm saying, you're going on these family trips and like activities are manipulated so that certain people always win. And then it's like it was a recipe for failure. And someone I know is very drained emotionally. Another one, unfortunately, took his own life. And you look at a lot of just the unhealthiness of a situation like that. And I think for me, a coping mechanism, and I was always drawn to movies as a kid, and I was always recreating scenes and drawing and building, but I think it was around 10 or 11. Really, I think I just watched movies because it was a coping mechanism. Like, when you just, when you go through a trauma and you just on autopilot, like you want to escape. And I think for a long time that was, and then when I was around 14, 15, I was very shy. I did enjoy performing. I enjoyed movies. But I look back and I really didn't have those tools. Like as I got older, I realized, wow, we didn't really there weren't a lot of insightful conversations at the dinner table, or it wasn't like talking about world events or something historic that's happening now and why it's relevant. It just always seemed to me like the message was, oh, things were so much better 30 years ago, or things were better in the 70s and 80s. And you're always kind of, everything's like throwback Thursday.
Wow. So you're thinking like, well, geez, what do I have to look forward to then if everything was?
Exactly. And the people, it's like, wow, it just seems like life was so much better before our so I feel like, there was a time I think I even went through a 60s phase, or it was really a reason why I grew my hair out and dressed like Jim Morrison, I think, for a year, because I just was listening to so many people say that was a better time. But I look back and say like, wow, I was really lost, and I like gave up on my passion when I was like right when I kind of was getting groomed. And at that particular time, my childhood friend, he had a crisis of identity because his biological father, there was a strained relationship, wasn't really a good guy, but his stepdad was a good guy, took care of his mom and his sister. But he had gotten cancer. And as he was dying, my friend was going through this, it's like 13, 14, young men need stable father figures around. And it was unfortunate that, this man was a good father figure, but at that time, there was a lot of other stuff happening in his family. So he was getting into trouble. He was getting expelled. And as he was going more and more down the gang road, I was in such denial because I felt like I was in a bubble, and I was very naive and sheltered to a degree. I just felt lost. It was really the death nail of like, childhood's over. And again, I'm only 14. And then it's like, oh, this older crowd is showing interest in you, and they're all successful in LA. And once you've like seen what else is out there, like high school and everything else, so for me, I felt like my childhood kind of ended at 14, 15. And the problem about that for me was, you're in this situation where basically I had to be an adult 24/7 to really show that I could handle it. It's like I could go out and go to an industry party, but then it's like I didn't have any peers to really talk about what was happening. And then it's like, again, this is like the early 2000s. So for me, it was like I was like a teenager just trying to make, thinking all this stuff was normal. And then as I got older, certain things that weren't normal that I took on. And then, when I talk to someone my own age for the first time, like have a really good talk, I'm like, wow, this is okay to have this kind of a conversation. And what ended up happening was, I just finished college, and I had a lethal arrhythmia. And so I was like dead my body just, wow. I remembered I woke up, I wasn't feeling well. And I was, it was just, I felt like I was killing myself just to graduate from college, dealing with my parents' divorce. My brother was going through some stuff. There's a lot of family drama. So I felt like my body shut down. And then when that happened, an opportunity again came with someone. My instinct was just to get me out of here. I need to, yes, show me the way, and I was like ready to do whatever this person did. And I feel like that's kind of where our lives really started to parallel was. And again, I don't know what it was like coming in and making a discovery for your class, but I felt like I was under the influence of other people for a long time, and I was carrying out stuff that wasn't soothing for my soul.
Yes, exactly. You're going against your own soul. I'm from Ohio originally, and I moved here in 2007. And I found class shortly after that because I knew when I got here, which by the way, I'd already lived in a number of places before moving to LA. I lived in New York, Atlanta, Italy, Santa Fe, New Mexico. I started modeling when I was 14 years old. I modeled when I was in New York, when I was in Atlanta. So I'd already kind of been exposed to the superficial industry or the superficial elements of entertainment industry as a model, definitely. And when I left New York, I was like, I just want to go back to school. Like, I don't really want to do this. Like, there was just so many people on drugs, and it just seemed like I witnessed so much that I was like, that's not who I am, and I don't want to do this. And you're constantly being told everything that's wrong with you. You're too pretty. You're not pretty enough. Your hips are too big. Your hips are too small. You're too tall. You're too short. And you're like, what? So when I went to school, I finished school, and then I moved out to LA because I was like, after, I think I finished in like 3.5 years maybe. And I was like, I actually still really want to act. And the only reason I did the modeling is because the opportunity came and I was going to use it to parlay into acting. Little did I know I would hate New York, and I'm not a cold weather person. So when I got here in 2007, I'd been struggling with my own substance abuse problems, and I'd been a little bit lost. I think I started getting lost as a teenager a little bit. and which is very common. And I knew that I needed a community. And that's the thing. People always wonder, well, like, how did you end up in a cult? Or how do you even end up in something like that, a high control group? Or how do you end up in an abusive relationship? Why don't you just leave? And I think that everyone is susceptible, because there are people who are so manipulative and so observant and so smart at looking at how they can get into you that you don't stand a chance. And it's human nature to want to be in it. We're communal creatures. Mm-hmm. We're tribal creatures. We don't want to live alone. That's not in our DNA. So yes, we want to be part of a group. We want to be cooperative. We want to create something good. People do want to do good in the world and change the world. And I'm one of those people, very idealistic and hopeful. I knew when I moved here, I said, I don't want to be drinking anymore. I don't want to be doing drugs. Like, I got to find the right environment. I interviewed at 2 acting classes. One of the warning signs of any, a toxic group, call mind control group, high control group, whatever you want to call it, is a kind of an environment of secrecy and denial and lying. And I noticed that in the article, one of the students, who was an officer who interviewed me for class, spoke on her behalf in the article to defend her. And he said he'd been in class for 12 years. Now, I was in class for 14 years, and he was there a decade before I was. So I thought, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? So I liked what I saw. They answered all my questions exactly the way, like the answers that I needed. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to join. And shortly after she returned from Italy, I met her. Immediately, she was, oh, well, let's go out to dinner after class. Well, why don't you come with me to see my students play? Well, I'll talk to you, because class used to be at her house when I started, before she moved to a theater. And so I felt she was taking a vested interest in me. So I was open and I shared a lot of things with her, very personal things about my history. And I didn't have a traumatic upbringing. I didn't have any trauma or weird abuse or anything in my family. I had a pretty normal middle class, my parents were married. They put me in dance class. They gave me private flute lessons. They supported me. They were scared that I was going to go model in New York, but they, I by no means had a dysfunctional childhood. I mean, everyone has trauma from childhood. It's all in varying degrees, the way trauma works. But for the most part, I go, well, there's no way I would have been susceptible based on my childhood. I think it's because I started kind of hanging out with the wrong people and doubting myself and losing my confidence, and drugs and alcohol just kind of snowball, and I was doing that for a good decade before I decided enough is enough. Because I started very young. And once I met her, she also used a lot of concepts in class. And so I'd be like, well, what's that? Well, what's that? Because I grew up learning about a lot of different religions. We did Buddhist practices and pagan practices and Christian practices. And I just was like, oh yeah, cool. Like, there's a spirit and everyone calls it something different. And that's religion. I got it really fast. You enter into these things like, oh, I'm signing up for something that's abusive. I think you're part of, I think I'm joining an acting class, which is what every actor should do. I know I need acting training. I know I need a community to help me, on this journey. I don't want to be alone in LA. It's very hard to be in a big city by yourself and not have a support group. I think it's hard anywhere in life to not have a support. And here all of a sudden was this community of people who were like, I'll help you move. I'll help you do this. Sure, I can help you get a side job. And so you're introduced with all of these concepts that are good and healthy and working. But then it gets twisted. So you're taking concepts, you want to do the greatest good for the greatest number. Of course, you don't want to be a selfish person. You want to do the greatest good for the greatest number. That makes sense. But then how does it get twisted? Well, what if you're having a medical emergency? Well, you got to do the greatest good for the greatest number. Or what if your family member is having a medical emergency, but this group needs you to be present at this event because you are essential to this play being produced? Well, then you have to be at this play because that's for the greatest number. And if your mother or father is having a medical emergency and they're in Ohio, well, you can't go there. What can you do? You can't do anything. So you better be here with us. And you're like, that doesn't feel right. So what you were saying about it not feeling right inside of you, that's your sonar, your radar, whatever it is, your alert system. And I think we don't listen to that enough because we're so bombarded with noise in our everyday lives. But that's kind of how they get you in, is they wear down that internal alarm system to go, oh, no, that's not, what you're feeling is actually this, not that. And you're like, oh, okay. And so then all of a sudden you kind of slip into this whole groupthink mentality. And before you know it, you've lost yourself. And you're like, wait, what's happening here? And you know deep down something is off, but you've been trained to feel like you're going to lose everything if you leave this person or you leave this group.
What I wanted to really validate about what you were saying too about how everyone's susceptible is because even when I, being 15 and felt sheltered, I want to explore the world, I'm awkward, and you're at that age where it's like girls are starting to pay attention to you, you want to be cool, or at least you want to appear cool, so you're trying to, and guys do that when they're inexperienced. They act tough and they think that they're the coolest thing in the world. We all go through that. Even people go through that phase, not just guys. But so, you're like at that awkward phase. And then, so I went into a situation like really unexperienced. And then, you're in an adult world being given a drink for the first time and people are telling you you're cool and you belong. And then you have these cool stories to tell your friends. I felt like I skipped so many crucial experiences and then just acted like an adult. And I think when the heart thing happened, that's really when everything was starting to just like crush me inside. And I realized, wow, a lot of my early experiences romantically were being at a party and having an older woman come up to me or being invited somewhere, thinking, this is normal Hollywood stuff. So I remembered being in my early 20s. I'm like, I don't think I've ever really been on a date or like gotten to know somebody and really had an authentic relationship. So I remembered after the heart thing happened, a lot of those things were crucial. So when I felt like I had this new chance of life, I'm cutting out all the old stuff and I gave up on acting for a bit. This job at WME happened. I'm going to have a real relationship now. And I'm going to go meet some new people and new friends. So I felt like glad I got to redo that over. But then in retrospect, I feel like I was overcompensating for what was lost in those later teen years by a kind of a group and a mentality that just really wasn't healthy for me.
It's not healthy for anyone. Definitely not healthy for anyone. When someone is telling you that they are the ultimate authority on everything, that we had a rule in class where after a scene, you got a critique, and there was a rule that any other student after that couldn't give you another critique, like, oh, I thought she was a little tough on you, or I didn't really see it that way. I liked when you did blah blah blah. All you could say was good job. And there were some very brutal critiques. There were critiques where I saw people being put over someone's lap and spanked. I saw her have a girl stand up on stage and get myself and 6 other women lined up to walk up to her and slap her in the face without this person's permission. I saw people's sexual abuse histories disclosed in public in front of everyone. I saw people have their hair pulled and have them dragged by her. She would grab them by the back of the head and yank their head down and drag them. And she would always say it was the thing of tough love. And because no one else in the class went against that, you couldn't say anything to the actor. And you couldn't say anything to her, because if you brought it up to her or tried to critique her, then she would explode in rage or anger. And then you would be handled that someone was suppressing you or trying to stop you. And she would always take concepts and kind of pervert them for her own use, which was interesting because I go back to her and say, oh, I just read this great thing in this course and I had this great realization. And she'd be like, actually, no, you don't understand it. It's this. And you're like, pretty sure I understood what it was. And like, I worked with a supervisor and pretty sure I got it. And she'd be like, no, that's not it. You have to go back and do it. And that's when I was like, And she would always be promoting, you need to do more coursework, you need to do more of this, you got to sign up for this. And she gets a commission of everything that I sign up for. It's just always a carrot that's dangled. Well, once you do this, then you'll be able to function this way in the world. And she dangled a lot of carrots individually too. There was a point where it was during the pandemic and she was going to do a play on Zoom. And I was like, I am not paying to do a play, because anytime we did a play, we all had to pay anywhere from $800 to $1,000 to $1,300 to be in the play. And we were considered co-producers. And a lot of people would do GoFundMe campaigns to raise money to be in these plays. And you also had to miss work to be at rehearsals, even though she would say, no, I'm going to double and triple cast it so that people that work during the day can come at night and people that work at night can come during the day. And then you'll all have a chance to perform. But then when you look at it, you have a 6-week run of a play, you get 1 or 2 performances, and you paid $1,000 for that. And it's justified as, well, you're getting acting lessons and you're getting this. But I can remember times where she would just break out into anger and rage and handle someone. And I'm not getting an acting lesson. I'm having to watch someone be handled because they can't say a line the right way. And I'm like, this isn't helping me at all. And this is really toxic. And I was never around screaming or yelling when I was a kid to that degree. Mm-hmm. The first time, I remember it was complete love bombing for 2 years. And the first time something changed, I was driving her home from a play rehearsal and she was trying to get something out of me because she said I was acting up and I wasn't listening to her. And she says, I think you have unexpressed resentment towards me. And I was like, well, God, I'm such a fucking naive, good person. I'm like, well, I guess maybe like a little bit. I was like, but I don't want to, and she flew into a rage that I've never witnessed ever. That I was so scared I was scared that she was going to attack me or that I was physically going to drive off the road just because like my body was so frozen. And I was terrified. And that happened a couple of other times. But once that happens, you're already invested, like this person really cares about you and really loves you and you really love them. And you have this deep relationship and it's, your mentor who wants the best for you and who's guided you all this way. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I must be a really bad person. So you never stop to think they're crazy. You just think, oh, I must have done something really, really bad. And so then you just continue on into that cycle. And then that's how you're like fully in and you're indoctrinated and then you don't really wake up right away. Some people wake up sooner than others. I don't spend time looking back at the past going, I should have woke up sooner, or I should have done this, or I should have done that, because that's pointless. We're not in the past, we're in the present. And I just look at, well, I did wake up and I did leave. And I'm now sitting here doing this with you and trying to speak out and create awareness because she's not the only one. There's other people like this teaching in this industry and other industries. There are people like this in entertainment across the board, whether it's an agent or a casting director or a director or a producer, and we're seeing that pop up all over the place, by the way. The biggest thing I learned is like, you had to conform to whatever was going on in the group. So you had to conform to the belief system. You had to conform to the rules of when she walks in, you stand up and you clap and you scream and you yell and you hoot. And, she sits in this really nice ornate chair and maybe we sit on the floor, maybe we sit in the, the metal folding chairs. She is served her dinner. If we have a dinner, someone heats it up for her. Someone brings it to her on a nice plate with a nice napkin and nice silverware. And she's very vocal about saying, well, I've worked hard, so I deserve all of this. And if you didn't bring it to her exactly the way she wanted it, then you were yelled at for being stupid or an idiot or being self-involved or out of present time or not taking care of the executive CEO.
Again, the people who are here, they don't want, if you're trying to make it, or they don't want you to get to a certain level. You need to be able to like pay for their classes, or even if it's not a transactional financially, because they don't need it, it's like it's your loyalty. So I mean, even just being in that orbit, it's to keep you here. And I totally get the mindset of where you're coming from. And I experienced that with numerous people. The same people who are saying don't get involved and don't be around that, they're the same people who look for any opportunity to be in that circle. I mean, they're going to show up to the parties. They're going to bring friends who aren't invited to parties. And then they're going to, take pictures and boast about, I mean, even there's people who were telling me how messed up the certain people were. And yet to this day, they still have pictures of those people in their homes to go, I know so-and-so.
Your voice as an artist and your point of view as an artist and a human in the world is important. So it kind of, in a weird way, going through all of that, as terrible as it was at the time, it sounds so cliche. I feel stronger because of it. And I don't necessarily, I still struggle on days with feeling, down on myself or getting angry, but I always come back to, I feel better when I don't hold on to any anger or any blame, because ultimately we are kind of responsible for where we walk. Oh, yeah. Everyone is on their own journey. And I think the most important thing is just to share your experience like we're doing here, so that other people don't feel so alone, so that, they can get out of situations and feel like there's support, and also know that they're not crazy, because you are definitely made to feel like you are crazy. Mm-hmm. Or that you're a betrayer or abandoner if you go against what that group think is. And when you do that, I want to say this for actors especially,
when you are forced to, I've noticed something in my acting now. In that scenario, it was like I could not do anything in acting without checking with her first, like during a play or a scene, even in an audition where I would coach with her. I would do exactly what she said, because if I didn't, then I would feel like I wouldn't book the job. And it was like, I felt like it's like you're dependent on the person.
Oh, yeah.
To act. And I was like, but I'm acting from things that aren't true to me. And because you are kind of isolated from any external friends or family, I was definitely made to feel that my family didn't have my best interest at heart. They loved me, but they just didn't want me to succeed. So I shouldn't talk to them that much or go visit them that much, so that was definitely discouraged, as were romantic relationships.
Around the same time, and this is around the time when I actually met you on the set of focus groups. After like the arrhythmia, I'm in this again, like I feel like our lives are parallel, because while you're going through all that,
that we were going through that simultaneously and we didn't even know it.
We didn't know it. Yeah. And it was 2007 when the arrhythmia happened, and when I started that new life in Beverly Hills. And then slowly the kind of group that you're mentioning was coming back in. It was a little bit different this time, but I was able to keep certain things at bay, but the people were still around and being manipulative, as you said. And I started noticing when you're playing ball and going along, it's easy. But then it was like the second I wanted to like start acting again or get back, that's when I started noticing everyone in that environment was like, okay. And that's when I realized, you can stay here, but everyone else has to be here. And it's like, you don't, and these people up here are going to be like, let me mentor you, looking down on you and saying, here, you need my guidance, you need me. And I felt like that was a big control issue. Ended up getting a manager on my own at the time. The person that I started working with, I had known through the agency, was a bit older than me. And they were like kind of the older, cool person you felt like you needed to know. And this person would, we'd work together and then getting our own stuff together. And then at a certain point, I just felt like this person was kind of carrying me along as this accessory and saying, oh, he's connected to so-and-so, and using whatever connections I had as like a gateway to open up doors. We ended up doing 2 movies after that. Leading up to it, I was just exhausted by this energy. It was always just being dependent on other people. And because this person was so drained, they started exercising their dominance and being, well, no, you need to hear this. And then it became like a kind of psychotic harping on me and pointing out everything that was wrong with me. And I'm like, and their problem was, this was like just them going into AA, and the movie that they were doing was about it, which it's a bizarre thing, because you're attributing like, I just booked a role in this movie, they're giving me another role in this movie. So I feel like you feel this loyalty and you want things to go, but at the same time, this person's kind of, you don't know how to cry, and I'm going to teach you how to cry, and we're going to go down to this dark emotional place. And then I remembered enduring a lot during that year, and for whatever it's worth, I felt like I came out of it okay. But then afterwards, now we're talking a few years, this person hasn't done much, but is still exercising this. And by this time, through AA, had met someone, and they kept using this person, be nice to me because I'll put in a good word for you. Or they were always kind of dangling this connection. My attitude was, don't bullshit. If you were capable of doing anything, and you realize the person was so desperate for whoever they were working with or for, and then whatever abuse they were enduring, they were putting it on me. We were writing a script, and it was just this relationship. I'm at a good place in my life, and they brought up a relationship that I had been through a few years prior, like, oh yeah, and this is just a phone conversation where we're just talking about the characters. Oh yeah, I think you should mentally go back to that dark. This is a casual Sunday. I'm about to get a massage to like get the tension. You're kind of like, wait, you're like getting me on the phone, and you're like literally doing this psychotic, and it was almost like this person was getting off on like getting into my head, and like, I'm going to bring this person back up, and I'm going to bring up what this person did to you 5 years ago. And so when we talk about a lot of the damaged people that are hurting other damaged people, I think that's what I started to realize. And then at that moment, I was moving on from the situation after the arrhythmia. And that was, so I looked at those as parallels, where I finally did some content on my own, and it was time to be, I'm done with this. I'm done with these people. And it was one of the scariest things, taking a leap, but it was the most rewarding.
Yeah. It was terrifying, because we were, told, and I also wanted to mention something that you said, I think that's really important, is a lot of, and some of my friends who had left class, they started class with her when they were kids. And I know that a number of people started with her when they were teens, when we are much more impressionable, and where we kind of learn how to function in society and in relationships. And I think about that because I know what I experienced you know, and I came in my 20s, so I was still, you know, young and not, especially having come out of New York in modeling, but I was still very much, you know, and that left an impression on me. So it's almost like I was kind of ripe for what I was about to get into. But I can just only imagine when you're seeing at 13 years old, someone being yelled at or screamed at or physically hit and it being normalized. And she would even do that in public. I mean, she knocked me pretty hard on top of the head in a Gelson's one day. I used to help her do her grocery shopping after I'd be driving her home from class. No, we were never told how to do things, but we were strongly encouraged or emotionally and physically coerced to do things the way that she wanted them done. So it's very tricky. It's very tricky. And unfortunately, I have friends that are still there. Well, we're not friends anymore because they're not allowed to talk to me. And they block you on social media and, you know, yada, yada, yada. And I heard that some of them had said like, oh, well, she only abuses you if you let her. And I'm thinking, and you're okay being with someone who abuses other people just because she didn't abuse you? Does that mean you're okay with what's going on in other parts of the country because it doesn't affect you? Does that mean that just because you didn't experience human trafficking that, well, not my business? It's a very dangerous way of thinking because there's a lot of things that have come to light in the last several years in the world, culturally, socially, that we've finally been like, enough is enough. We can't deal with these systemic issues that have been plaguing humanity. We can't, no, silence is not allowed. And the fact that these people just go, oh, well, you know, it didn't happen to me, so it must be okay, is why we are where we are. So that's why I think it's really important, whether it's an acting class, a relationship, a job, a film set, a university, that people that experience this and see it, it's like if you see something, you say something. It is not about vengeance. It is not about trying to bring someone down. It is like, guys, we got to wake up here. We have to do something about this. And I mean, ultimately, if you're stepping back and you've got your, you know, spiritual hat on and you're evolved and enlightened, you can go, okay, this person who's damaged, like you said, damaged people, hurting other damaged people, somewhere inside them is that little 4 or 5, 6-year-old girl or boy who's really, really hurt and really, really damaged. And they never woke up and they never handled it. And because they never woke up and handled it, it's continuing to happen. So I think it's like all of our responsibility to wake up to that fact. And I don't know if people that are damaged to a certain degree that are so harmful based on, you know, the story that, you know, stories you've been sharing and my personal story, I don't know if they can recover or heal, but it's definitely a hope of mine that it wakes people up.
At that point in my life, being like, you know, I've dealt with all this and I felt myself slipping again. I was back mentally right before like the arrhythmia.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt everything that happened to me when I was 15, it was justified. Like, well, that's what happens when you're 15. You're in LA, you're in the industry. This is how it goes. And there was this, you have to accept that. And the thing is, I never really had those tools to really, it didn't feel right at the time. And I just got myself to believe that it's okay. And I felt myself kind of really going down I was really at a crossroads as a point where like, I feel like I'm doing good stuff, but there's this other part of me, like I'm still being weighed down and I don't want to be like these examples. I do not want to end up like these people who are suppressive to me. You know, I don't want to become this. So it was like really at the end of my 20s too. And that's really when you do make those decisions. Who am I going to be? And I just remembered I had to leave and it was the healthiest thing for me. My life just changed. So once I left, it was a little scary. People are so passive aggressive in the industry and it's, you know, and I mean, there was just, forgetting to invite you to this. And this was happening when I was still like living amongst these people. And then it was like when I left, I just didn't look back. I'm like, I'm moving on. And then there's like these guilt trips. And honestly, once I was so direct, those people never messed with me again. So that was liberating. And that happened about 2015. There had been a few times when certain people had attempted to reach out and I almost went back. I'd read something that happened. I'm like, oh, this is why, because they're dealing with this that's out there in the world. When Me Too happened, there were some people that came into my head. And within 3 months, this company decided to part ways with so-and-so, or everyone was kind of dealing with their own stuff in the aftermath of everything. Someone I was close with who experienced a lot of the stuff that I did took their own life during the pandemic. And I knew exactly the pain that this person went through and the weight that they had. And this person opened up to me. We were very close. And you look at the environment, and I just felt the groups were self-destructing. It was sad. Wow, these people at a certain point, I mean, I actually thought that that person had my best interest. I think where you and I are right now, Abigail, because I'm so proud of you and where you've come from. You've always been talented and you've always been strong-willed. I've let my guard down and been vulnerable, and I appreciate you telling your story. They always say like success is the best revenge. So where you are in your life, I'm so proud of you and where you're going, and you realize what doesn't work. And I feel like to people listening, and when I have someone like you on the show, I really connected with what you had to say. When you really felt like this was unhealthy and made your decision to leave, you're telling me there's all these indicators to the personalities, but like what was the final straw, and when did you really have that clarity or that realization, like this is no longer a healthy environment, I need out, and I'm doing things my own way?
The Zoom play thing and I said I wasn't going to do it. And she, this was like obviously during the pandemic, and I was actually at her house because I was helping her with something, because I was on the inner circle, I was trustworthy to be at her house, with both of us masked. She started questioning me about why I didn't want to be in the play. And I said, hello, it's the pandemic. Nobody has a job. Nobody can work. Like, I was like, I don't have money to do a play. Like, what the fuck? Like, I think this was at a point where like even Hollywood was still shut down somewhat. I said that it was about money. And she said, that's just your excuse. That's not really what it is. And started saying that I was in fear, that I was studying with people who had left class before. She was grilling me about, one of my friends who was my best friend left in 2018, and we stopped speaking after she left. So I lost a best friend. And then I had another best friend leave in 2020, early on in the pandemic, but I still stayed in touch with her. She proceeded to grill me, to come at me every angle of why I wasn't going to do this play, and get me to reveal whatever reason she was. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to be yelled at on Zoom and be up till 2 a.m. It just wasn't how I wanted to spend my time during the pandemic when we were all hysterical. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, so I didn't say that. And she just went until finally I just started crying, because it's, I'm not sure if the term is word salad. There's a lot of things that narcissists do, or tactics that are used in abusive, toxic environments and relationships to control you. And word salad is where you just kind of talk in circles, but you're not really saying anything. And, or they talk so much that they wear you down. So I was being worn down. It was about a 2-hour conversation of her drilling me about why I didn't want to do this play. And finally I just said, I just don't want to act anymore. I'm done. I don't want to act. And then as soon as I broke, I watched her try to build me back up and go, well, you're the best actor of all the other girls. I mean, yeah, they might always work, but like, you're really going to go play. Like, I'm saying go places. It wasn't word for word. Don't quote me on it, but it was very like flattering me and, coddling me. And then she says, and I have something for you, but I really can't give it to you until you change your attitude. And I remembered a friend of mine who'd left class who said that she said something similar to her, like, well, you're the best of all the girls. Like those other girls, like, please. And I went, oh my God, she's fucking manipulating me. I was just like, so I just, acted along with it. And I was like, okay, blah, blah, blah. And she was very intent on saying that myself and a number of other, female veterans in the class that didn't want to do the play had really hurt her feelings and let her down. And I'm like, I'm sorry. If you don't want to do a project in Hollywood, is it a 2-hour handling by the director of why you don't want to do it and that you've hurt their feelings and let them down? I've never heard of that happening. It's you turn down a job, you turn down a job. Right? Yeah. So that was a major thing. And I just started the fact that we weren't physically in the theater, so we weren't like trapped in the physical space. You would see things happen on Zoom, and when we were physically in class, we weren't allowed to have our phones on us. I was actually the person responsible for collecting everyone's phones and turning them off and putting them in a bag or a basket. Yeah. Yeah, which is not a bad thing. I know a lot of successful musicians, dancers, artists, whatever, or court, for example, if you go to court, you can't have your phone on. You got to put it away, right?
Yeah.
And you get fined if it goes off. So that's like a very normal thing, right? But we didn't have our phones on us. So on Zoom, people had their phones because she can't control that. And someone would see something and all of a sudden, like I would get a text or somebody else would get a text and you'd be like, oh, that's kind of weird, right? And you're like, yeah. And it's just like it was magnified how odd and aggressive the behavior was. So I was like, this really doesn't feel right. So I just started kind of thinking back to the history and I started, reading about narcissistic abuse and cults and mind control. And I watched the documentary, The Vow. You saw these similarities in behavior and character and tactics used for manipulation. And I was like, holy fuck, I'm in something really bad. And I don't know what, but I've got to get out. And I remember I was like, I probably have to have a therapist. So I found a therapist and I met with her and I said, so I think I'm in this group that's really bad. And I told her a few things and she was like, that's horrible and not normal. And I was like, oh, okay. Because I'd never been in any other acting class outside of like, a few ones I'd taken in college and high school. Right. So I was like, okay. And then I said, all right, well, I'll meet with you next week. And then we can plan an action. And I was like, I'm just going to send an email because then it's like a no contact, like you should go no contact with abuse, right? That's what is recommended by a lot of therapists. So I was like, I'll just send an email and that'll be that. I couldn't wait a week for my next therapy session. I just sent the email. So I came back the following week and said, well, I left. Help. What do I do now? Because we're constantly told all these people that left, they blew class. You never just left the class. You blew class. We were basically told that if we left her, we would never work again because we wouldn't have the access to the expert that knew everything about how to handle a career in Hollywood and be on the red carpet, but also acting lessons, all of those things. You wouldn't be able to make it. You wouldn't make it. You would never work again. And it was interesting because 2-3 months after I left, I booked a job.
And you did everything you told them to. You got out of that suppressive environment. You became your own person, and you just demonstrated it right there with what you did. And I thank you for bringing up therapy, because once I left late 2014, it was like there was something in me. There's baggage in me I need to open up. And I remember just going into this therapist. I'm like, this is my life. This is what I've been conscious of since I was 5. These are the people I've been involved with. I need to let this all out. And I just remember being in that therapist's office and addressing a lot of those things, looking at it from a clear perspective, which I never would have gotten in the environment that I had. And the bizarre thing too was, and again, so I attribute like this whole new growth. And then when the pandemic did happen, like the person I told you about who passed away, that person came up a lot in therapy. And there were a few instances that I addressed to my therapist about what was happening in this person's life. And that's when I realized this person wanted to go on a different path than the one that was encouraged on him. And then when I was done with my therapy sessions, my therapist was moving. July 11th, 2020, we're having our last therapy session. We're saying our emotional goodbyes, going on our own ways. And then the very next day, that it was in the news that that person took their life that I was talking about. And I remembered I emailed my therapist and says, everything we discussed prepared me for this. One of the things that's intrigued me about you, you would post some clips on social media and you would talk about people who were hurt other people. And you were always saying things insightful that I totally understood what you were saying, but I didn't know your whole backstory. So it was enough for me to be like, wow, Abigail's really saying something that I agree with, or she's going through something good for her. I like that she's expressing it. But now, then we fast forward and I'm seeing what you've been through, this journey that you're on, and recognizing it. It's just like, wow, this was the time that we needed to talk and address these things. And I'm so proud of you for really being someone who's endured this, who's said, I've always respected your talent, who you are as a person. And you've always struck me as someone who cares about people, wants to see things. So the fact that it's not like, I need to be successful so I can hurt other people. It's like, no, this was a bad environment. I want to use my life for good. So I feel like our conversation, the knowledge that you're sharing is beneficial to people listening, to people who are starting off in the industry.
Exactly. When you were speaking earlier about when you chose to leave that group of people and then experiencing that the loss of that person, there's an element of grief when you leave a group of people or a person. There's an element of grief, I think, that also is not talked about, because when you were saying that, I was getting really emotional and I was like, okay, just keep it together. And so I love that you just shared all of that, and that, you're talking therapy, or whatever. I mean, I went down a whole spiritual path and found out, return to the person that I recognized at 5 years old, which was really interesting, which is what led me to open my business, and what led me to paint. And, and I do EMDR therapy. So I'm working on like reprocessing traumatic memories. Right. But I was hit with a lot of grief that I just had to kind of sit with and feel and be uncomfortable with. And thank you for saying that about my posts, because there was a minute I was doing this like mental health Monday posts. I was like, I don't know if these are helping anybody. I feel like I'm rambling like an idiot. What am I doing? And so I was, but I was posting them every Monday to just be like, hey guys, we're not alone. Everyone's going through stuff. And like, who am I to be like saying things to people? I'm not like healed completely and enlightened and perfect. But I think you're right. I think people are tuning in to more real people, because they don't want that manipulated medium or financed, controlled message. They just want to hear people's experiences and know that they're not alone. And even still talking about it now with you, like some of the things I share, I'm like, well, should I be saying this? Like, there's still like a scary element to it. But I just keep reminding myself, like, you just have to tell the truth. You just have to tell the truth.
I'm really stoked for whatever journey you embark on next. Is there something else that you're hoping to accomplish?
Like, you too.
You too, yeah.
Took me some time to kind of fall back in love with acting, and the experience did leave a bad taste in my mouth about the industry, because I thought, well, if this isn't an acting class, is it also on set? Is it also like, and then you're reading all the Me Too stuff and you're like, fuck, is there anybody good in this business? But the universe said, yes, there is. And they've put some people in my life who are very good and very honest, and collaborating with them has gotten me excited about acting. I'm falling back in love with acting again. And I never stopped auditioning the whole time. I was still like, okay, I'm doing this, but my heart wasn't in it. And now I feel like my heart's returning to it. I'm also launching a, for lack of a better word, blog on Substack. It's called Post Cult Life, and it'll probably be launching in February on Substack, which you can subscribe for free. I'm just going to be talking mostly about the recovery journey from a spiritual perspective, because that is kind of what helped me the most. And a couple of projects that I cannot discuss, NDAs.
Always a good thing.
Always a good thing, as long as Hollywood keeps moving forward and like funding doesn't fall apart. And then I have my spiritual business, which is Sacred Healing Art. And it's on Instagram as Sacred Healing _art. And the website is sacredhealingartla.com. And that is where I make sort of like spiritual products. I do channeled paintings, where it's basically holistic healing art with color therapy and crystal medicine. And I also offer Reiki while I have the time to do it.
I love episodes like this, because we really talk about what's happening in our lives. There's always been this connection, I think, between the two of us. And I think this moment, you being vocal about your experiences, as with myself, I feel like this was meant to happen at this moment. We have something to share, and I'm very proud of you for the direction that you've taken in your life and your outlook on life. And I know I'm so excited for this next chapter. I mean, I'm glad we had that time to work together years ago. I know that there's going to be the right project in the future that we're going to be connected again. Hey, Abigail, I just can't thank you enough for your time, for your story, for the inspiring message. And listen, just keep rocking. I can't wait to have you back again. We'll talk about whatever's happening in our lives, projects and new endeavors. Thank you again for being who you are and staying true to yourself. And you are an inspiration, Abigail. You keep rocking.
Oh my God. Can you just say that to me every morning? Can I get a recording of Kash being like, you are an inspiration?
That's who you are, and you know it. Yeah, I'll make a recording of that and I'll send it to you.
Thank you so much. It's really, really important that I connect with individuals where this is personal for them and it matters. So I really, really appreciate you having me on here. And I'm excited for both of us on our journeys. And it's validating to know that somebody else, because you came out of it a while ago, and mine's more recent. So to see you doing so well is also inspiring and like affirming and comforting for me. So thank you.
Hey, we're in this together. We're going to the top.
Bye.